Hi guys, it's great to see you. Now this is a really short video explaining some of the differences you are going to find when you come back to gathering with us here at Oasis Portsmouth in November, because we're excited to announce that on the 8th of November, on Remembrance Sunday, we are going to meet here at our building. It's Remembrance Sunday, and we are going to together publicly watch the pre-recorded service. So although it's going to be a pre-recorded service, we're going to actually get to watch it together in our building, which I think you'll agree is really exciting. And this video is designed to try and walk you through some of the changes that we've had to make to how we do things. The government have obviously made a lot of changes to law, and they're there for our safety, and we as Christians must respect and adhere to them. So I want to walk you through what you're going to expect now. So if you follow me, we'll go this way. We're going to start at the very front of the church. Now, when you actually come to church, guys, you'll probably have to book in. Now, we haven't worked out the ins and outs yet, but those details will come to you soon. But once we know who is coming, you will have to, I expect, queue up outside the church building. Now, I remember in the prayer meeting a few months before we locked down, Maria had a prophetic word about people queuing to get into the church. And I'm sure none of us thought this would be the result of that prophecy, but I expect you will have to queue. And outside the building, you will see orange marker tape. Now, this tape is 2 meters apart. And again, as you get to the building, we are asking you to queue up. And please respect the 2 meter gaps. So once you've done that, you'll be asked to come in one by one or family group by family group. When you do get in, we must ask you to put on a face covering. It has to cover your nose, it has to cover your mouth. A screen isn't sufficient, we must wear a mask. Unless you have a medical reason, a bona fide medical reason not to wear one, we must ask you to wear them. For the sake of this video, because you probably can't hear me very well, I'm going to remove mine, but you must wear one. If you haven't got one, there'll be a small supply available at the desk over here. Now, on entry to the church building, we'll ask you to sanitize your hands. We have a station here right by the very front door. We will also ask you to register your name and your telephone number. That's for a family group or individuals or couples, a name and a phone number. If you haven't got your name and your number with you and you've got your phone, there'll also be a QR code you can scan if you're mobile, which again will go to the NHS track and trace. This is to protect us and it is to keep us all safe. So if anyone gets ill, we can notify you. So once you've washed your hands, once you have signed in, you can come through into the foyer. The rooms behind me, they're going to be locked. There's going to be no tea or coffee before the service, but you are more than welcome to bring your own travel mugs in, your own coffee, your own tea, your own biscuits. So you are more than welcome to do that. We will never ever stop you from drinking tea. The toilets in this room, they're going to be available for you to use, but in the course of the actual meeting, we would like you to use the toilet at the back, because the service will be an hour only. It'll be very short, and I'm sure that'll be manageable. So if you follow me, I'll take you through to the actual building. There'll be arrows to denote where you're going, but again, it's pretty obvious. Now, you'll have a lead-through person guide you into the actual gathering. They will welcome you. There'll be a team of stewards to help you. But when you get into this room, the main hall, there are 70 seats in here, believe it or not. And if you're a couple, sit in a group of 2. If you're a single, sit in a single. If you're a family of 4, get a family of 4. And you know how it's going to work. But we must ask you to respect your bubbles. It's got to be household bubbles only, and once you're in your seats, you must stay there. You can pray from your bubbles, you can wave from your bubbles, but you must respect your bubbles. So just to reiterate, you must stay in household bubbles only. I'm afraid to say that house groups won't be allowed to sit together. You'll be able to sit near each other, but it must be households. Now, the service will have a lead-through person, as I said. They will tell you information, adverts for the upcoming services. We will then have a time of worship. Now, guys, I know it's hard for us not to sing, because we love to sing in this church. But you know what? God looks at our hearts. You'll have a band up there most weeks with me, Laura or Paul, and they will be leading the worship from the stage. They will be singing with microphones so you can hear them, but we are not really permitted allowed to sing. You can sing quietly or mouth the words behind your masks if you want to engage in that way. But again, I must reiterate, God doesn't care how loud you are. He looks at your heart. Someone will preach. There'll be times to pray from your bubbles. That's absolutely fine. And at the end of the service, you will be kind of released from the gathering by the lead-through person. It'll be probably row by row from the back. We don't want obviously it to be a big gathering at the back, so that will be controlled by a person at the front. So the back row will leave, they can go outside, take their masks off, then the next row, then the next row, then the next row. I just pray this video has helped you. I know it's strange times, but we must adhere and respect the government guidelines. We cannot wait to see you. I cannot wait to be back with you together in our building, worshipping with you, listening to the word of God and encouraging us again together. So guys, I pray you're blessed. I can't wait to see you. Keep your eyes peeled for more videos on our Facebook, on our WhatsApp group. There'll be letters sent to most people too. So have a great day, guys. Bless you, and we look forward to seeing you soon. See you later.
Good morning, welcome to Oasis Online. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan. Whether you're watching us in real time or whether you're following us on catch up, it's great to have you with us. And we're going to have Ross come and speak to us a bit later on, and we've got Andy and Laura who are leading the worship for us. So it's going to be a great morning, really looking forward to it. Just wanted to start off just a couple of thoughts really. I was thinking about in the Bible where it says about God is our comforter. And in these continually changing times, times of difficulty, I was really struck by some people's approach in this situation, and how some people seem to really be thriving. And I think we really need to be aware as well that some people are just struggling to survive. And those verse where it says God is our comforter, I was struck by the fact that it seems really reassuring, and it's great to know that God is always there and always looking out for us. But I was thinking for people who are struggling and are trying to survive, that sometimes I think those words can seem almost condemning and say that actually, why am I not feeling comforted if God is my comforter? And it can actually make you feel further away. And I was just reassured when I was reading and looking at this in the Bible about how many times it says about God is there and God is our comforter. And I was just reassured that there are all these these great giants have got in the Bible. It's great, wonderful men and women of God, and yet they are talking about needing the comfort of God. And I think it isn't wrong to need the comfort of God and to need those arms of love. And it's okay to not be okay. With everything that's going on, with all the uncertainty that people are facing, it's okay to not be okay. And I just want to encourage you really to reach out to us at Oasis if you are needing comfort, or if you're needing some help or some support, just some encouragement. Please use the WhatsApp group if you're part of that, or you can PM us on the Facebook page, or if you've got contacts with any of the leaders, or just anyone at Oasis, please don't kind of sit there dwelling on in silence, but please reach out and hopefully we can provide some support. The most important thing at the moment is kindness, and we need to show the kindness of God and be kindness in this environment. So please get in touch if we can help. So we're going to hand over to Andy and Laura now. So invite us into their homes, to lead us in worship. Great.
Jesus, we want to say that you are the greatest thing that's ever happened to any of us, Lord. And we love you. We really love you, Lord. And I thank you that you first loved us, Lord Jesus, that you decided to leave heaven's glory and come to earth and sacrifice yourself on a cross that we could be free from sin and shame and guilt and our pasts. So we say thank you for the cross, Lord God. Thank you that you laid aside your majesty. And as we sing this song, I pray that it will be an offering from us to you, telling you how good you are, how wonderful you are, and how worthy you are. because Jesus, you are worthy. And we love you. We focus our eyes upon you right now as we sing this song, Lord. You're so beautiful, Jesus. You laid aside your majesty, gave up everything for me. You suffered at the hands of those you had created. You took all my guilt and shame when you died and rose again. Now today you reign in heaven and earth exalted. You laid aside your majesty, you gave up everything for me. You suffered at the hands of those you had created. You took all my guilt and shame when you died and rose again. Now today you reign in heaven and earth exalted. I really want to worship you, my Lord. You have won my heart and I am yours forever and ever. I will love you. You are the only one who died for me, gave your life to set me free. So I lift my voice to you in adoration. You laid aside your majesty, gave up everything for me, suffered at the hands of those you had created. You took all my guilt and shame, thank you Lord, when you died and rose again. Now today you reign, yeah, in heaven and earth exalted. I really want to worship you, my Lord. You have won my heart and I am yours forever and ever. I will love you. You are the only one who's died for me. You gave your life to set me free. So I lift my voice to you in adoration. You are the only one who died for me. You gave your life to set us free. So we lift our voice to you in adoration. Yeah. Thank you, Jesus. You're so good, Lord. We worship you, Jesus. We worship you. We join with the angels in heaven and the saints And we sing worthy, worthy, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy, worthy. Jesus.
Give life, you are love. Bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. You give life, you are love. Bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. Pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour
open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you, none like you. Into the darkness you shine, out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you, none like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Water you turned into wine. You opened the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you, there's none like you. Into the darkness you shine, out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you, no one, none like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against us? Stand against us. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? What could stand against us? What could stand against us? What could stand against us? 'Cause our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God, our God. Is it true to and the blind set free. Yes, it's true, and I believe it. I'm living for you, yeah. I'm gonna be a history maker in this land. I'm gonna be a speaker of truth to all mankind. I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna run into your arms again. I'm gonna be a history maker in this land. I'm gonna be a speaker of truth to all mankind. I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna run into your arms again. But it's true today that when people stand with the fire of God and the truth at hand, we'll see miracles, we'll see angels sing, we'll see broken hearts making history. Yes, it's true, and I believe it. We're living for you, yes, Lord. I'm gonna be a history maker in this land. I'm gonna be a speaker of truth to all mankind. I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna run into your arms again. I'm gonna be a history maker in this land. I'm gonna be a speaker of truth to all mankind. I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna run into your arms again. Well, it's true today that when people stand with the fire of God and the truth in hand, we'll see miracles, we're gonna see angels sing, we'll see broken hearts making history. Yes, it's true, and I believe it. We're living for you, Jesus. One more time. I'm gonna be a history maker in this land. I'm gonna be a speaker of truth to all mankind. I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna run into
Thanks, Andy and Laura, for leading us in worship again. That was brilliant. And we're going to hand over to Ross now, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what the effect of this pandemic might be having on the next generation. So my kids, how are they likely to be affected? What does the future hold for them? So thanks, Ross.
Hello and good morning, Oasis. I'm so excited to be sharing with you this morning on a topic that has been close to my heart for several months now. The title of my talk is called Gen C, and we're going to be looking at the implications of what has happened in the world this year and what that means for the next generation. And it all kind of centers around this verse found in Judges, which reads, "After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel." And so we get that warning there that there's so many great things had gone on in that generation, and yet the generation after it, they didn't know the Lord. And so that's the warning that is there. But I want to make a few things clear first. Firstly, when we talk about next generation, I think sometimes that invokes certain feelings in our minds. And what I'm not saying is that now's a time for us to step aside to allow another generation to come in. In fact, I think now's a time for us to step up so that we can reach and engage with and support the next generation that is coming through. And also, if we can get an understanding of what the next generation is going to look like, I think we can start to see what God is doing in this season. We can start to understand how God is going to impact and work in that generation, and therefore what our role will be in supporting God in the mission that he has for us. And so what defines a generation? In 1946, following World War II, there was a rise in births across the world, and thus came out of that a generation known as the baby boomers. For other generations, there's a common historical experience or behaviour that has defined a generation from another one. And I believe that this year, the things that have happened around the world, a global pandemic, has defined that a new generation is going to be shaped. And to prove that point, let me just tell you two very quick stories. The first one is that my kids are 6 and 7 now, and we moved to Portsmouth just over 4 years ago. And when I speak to them about stories or things that we've done or places we've lived before Portsmouth, they don't remember it. They only remember living in Portsmouth. Second one is that I would fall into the category of the millennial generation, which was going to be known as the technological generation. And for those of you who are younger than me, this will seem crazy to you, but I remember a time where we had to plug our internet into the phone line, and if someone wanted to use the phone in the house, we would have to disconnect from the internet to allow them to make that phone call. The thought that my kids would think about a telephone that is plugged into a wall, or the idea that you can't access the internet wherever you are, would seem strange to them. And yet for us, we grew up around technology, but that technology was changing. We remember a time before the technology. I remember working in a mobile phone shop on the first Apple iPhone launch. And so we saw this technology changing and adapting. We remember a time before that technology, and we saw it develop and we saw it grow. For our kids and young people growing up today, for many of them, they're not going to remember a time before this global pandemic. And even when there's a vaccine, and even if things start to go back to a normality, whatever that kind of looks like, there are going to be things that are going to have shaped and changed this generation from what we knew. And while we're learning to adapt and we're learning to change with the way that the world is now, we remember a time before coronavirus, we remember a time before this pandemic, and so things are slightly different. And so what would this generation look like? As I said, I've called this talk Gen C, or the Corona generation, but as I was researching this, I found some other suggestions. If you're watching on Facebook, why don't you put in the chat which one you prefer? And so the first one that was suggested in this article was the Coronials. So a little bit like the millennials, you've got the Coronials. The next one is a generation that's probably going to be used to having to quarantine. And there's an app now, isn't there? And if you've been in contact with someone who has coronavirus, you have to quarantine for a certain amount of time. So how about the quarantines as a generation? Put it in the chat if you like that one. And the last one, which I think is my personal favourite, and so we have a generation that is very used to Zoom. I mean, how many of us were using Zoom before this year? I certainly wasn't. But we've got used to using Zoom, whether it be for work or if it's for school. The church is using it. We use it for our youth groups. Some of the home groups are using Zoom. Stephen's Bible study is done on Zoom. So how about this for a generation? The baby Zoomers. Put in the chat if you like that one, the baby Zoomers. Let me just share a few thoughts really on what I think will be some of the big factors in this next generation and what that means for us, how we can respond and how we can step up to help reach and support this generation. The first one is that I think this generation is going to be the socially distant generation. And even if we think of the years to come and a vaccine comes in and we're able to go back to the way that things are, this is a generation that is growing up around these kind of concepts. The idea of there being bubbles. My kids at school now are in bubbles of their own year group, and so they're not interacting with other children older than them or younger than them. Even in the workplace, a lot of businesses now are becoming familiar with working from home. A lot of roles, it's now being seen as, well, actually that role does work from home and it could perhaps save us money as a business. And so perhaps even in the years to come, businesses are going to find that working from home is something that they're going to be doing a lot more. And so I believe this is a generation that's going to be impacted by this social distancing. It's a generation that's going to be used to meeting in these smaller groups. And so how do we as a church respond to a generation that perhaps doesn't have the social skills to be able to interact in these bigger groups? Big sporting events and big church gatherings are not allowed at the moment. And it's great that very shortly we're going to be able to meet together again as a church. And for many of us, we're going to be able to do that. But how long is it going to be until we have these big church gatherings? How long is it going to be until everybody is meeting together? So what are the implications on a generation that are growing up in a time of social distancing? My second one links on from that as well, which is the virtually isolated. I spoke a little bit about Zoom already. We think about all the different ways that we've been meeting online, the online services. This has become quite familiar for a period of time now. And what we're finding is, especially amongst youth leaders, that these online youth Zoom meetings have been fantastic, but being online doesn't create that same sense of fellowship and togetherness. And so how do we respond to a generation that has been virtually isolated? For so long now, we've been speaking on the dangers of a generation that has been growing up online now. And yet, through the lockdown, that generation was sent back into the virtual world. And so these two things together, the socially distant and the virtually isolated, what does that mean for us as a church? How can we respond to a generation that perhaps is going to struggle with the social skills, is going to perhaps struggle getting away from this virtual isolation? How do we respond and how can we preach the gospel? I also believe it's a health-conscious generation, a generation that at a young age is going to be aware of health concerns. It's a generation that has not been able to meet their grandparents perhaps, that is understanding that their actions or illnesses that they pick up, while they can be fine, that they can pass on to those more vulnerable than themselves. It's a generation that is going to be used to seeing people wearing face masks in public so that they don't get ill. And so what does that mean in terms of anxiety? Is there going to be a generation that has health anxieties? And so what does it mean for us, especially when we talk about Jesus as healer? What does that mean, and how are we able to talk about that to a generation that has faced a global pandemic, or a generation that has only known a world that has faced a global pandemic or the aftermath to that? The next one is perhaps a little bit more positive, and I think it's going to be a respect-driven generation. This is a generation that has been out on the streets clapping for the NHS, a generation that has been clapping for key workers. Hopefully this is a generation that is going to come to kind of respect jobs that perhaps I believe hasn't necessarily had that respect. We think about supermarket workers, retail workers, those on the front line, emergency workers. This is going to be a generation that I think is going to see and respect those kind of jobs and roles. And so as a church, are we going to see a generation that is going to want to help, and a generation that is going to want to make a big impact in their communities? A respect-driven generation. It's also a generation that perhaps, like the generations before, has been hit with so much information through the internet, but perhaps this year has highlighted several issues with that. Fake news and conspiracy theories are in kind of every article at the moment. And so how do we preach the good news of Jesus? How do we preach the truth of Jesus' resurrection to a generation that is being hit with so much information and is struggling to decipher between what is real, what is fake, what is true, what is conspiracy? And so how do we preach the good news of Jesus to this generation? I've also got here a lost generation, and that could be in two senses. Firstly, this is a generation that is going to be hit by a recession. And I know the generations before have been hit by recessions, but perhaps this one will be the biggest of the lot. A generation where education has been spoke about so importantly, and yet a generation that has faced a lockdown in which they weren't able to go to school, a generation that has been meeting on Zoom for lessons for a long period of time, a generation that is going to be worried about the opportunities when they do finish school, the lack of jobs, a recession-hit economy. Is this going to be a lost generation? And we also have to consider what the impacts are in terms of a lost generation, in terms of faith. Is this a generation that is going to start to question the world that they're in? Is it a generation that will turn away from God because of what they've experienced? Or is it a generation that's going to be asking big questions, and therefore a generation that is going to be turning to Christ? So many questions that young people have had to ask themselves over the last few months. Questions like, when can I go back to university? Will there be another lockdown? Will there be jobs available? Will I lose my job? Can I see my family? Can I go home for Christmas? All these big questions. And so what will the faith be of this generation growing up with the pandemic? In order to reach this generation, I think there are two things that may possibly hold us back. And we've been looking at this series of not being judgmental. And I think there's two things that can stop us from reaching this generation. The first one is judging God. And the second one is judging different generations. And I'm going to expand on those a little bit for the next few minutes. Firstly, judging God. And I've been thinking about the story of Exodus, in which God takes the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And we read in Exodus chapter 3 from verse 7 to 8. Then the Lord told him, this is to Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. It also says in verse 15, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. God gives them a promise that he's heard their cries and he's going to answer their prayers. And so God starts to send these 10 plagues on the Egyptians in the hope that the Pharaoh will allow the Israelites to go. But in each case, the Pharaoh's heart is hardened. And on the last plague God sends, which is the death of the firstborns, finally the Pharaoh agrees and lets the Israelites go. However, he has a change of heart and he sends his soldiers to go and chase down the Israelites. And when he does, we read in chapter 14 of Exodus from verse 10 that when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, it is because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness. What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And so they're faced with this challenge that that God was going to bring them out of slavery, and yet here they are. They're on their way out. This big moment in their history, and yet the Egyptians are chasing them down. And so they see the problems, they see the challenges and the hurdles instead of the promise that God has for them. And if we read from verse 15, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide the water, that the Israelites can go through to the sea onto dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen.'" And so God does answer their prayers, and Moses lifts up his rod and the seas part, and the Israelites are able to escape from slavery. And so the Israelites are out of slavery and they're in the wilderness, surely remembering all of the great things that God has done for them. And yet, in chapter 16, in verse 2, we read, "If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt," they moaned. "There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death." Now they're faced with another challenge. They are out in the wilderness and they have nothing to eat. And God answers that prayer again. But it's really interesting that these promises that God had promised to bring them out of slavery, and yet they're faced with these challenges. The Egyptians are chasing us down. They're going to kill us. We have nothing to eat. We're going to starve. But you see, for us, maybe we are looking at our circumstances right now, but perhaps our story is different, right? Because for us, when we look back to 2019 and some of our prayers, well, yeah, maybe things weren't good. But when we think about everything that's happened in the world this year, well, yeah, Lord, like that's unfair. We want to go back to the way things were. And yet maybe we're looking at our circumstances. Maybe we're looking at the challenges that we are faced with. Maybe some of our prayers has been that some of our family members will come to know Jesus. Maybe our prayer has been that we want to see a global revival. And I'm not sure what God is going to do in this season, but perhaps our obstacle is that we are looking at our circumstances instead of what God is doing. What are the things that God has promised you in your life? Perhaps they are not being seen in the way that you thought they were going to be, but perhaps God has a different plan. God is going to use these situations to answer those prayers. Maybe we're not going to see big stadiums filled with people giving their lives to Jesus, but what if there are thousands of small groups across the country that are seeing people through relationship and fellowship come to know Jesus? Maybe God is answering prayers in different ways. And I don't know what God is doing in this season, but we can't look at the challenges. We have to look at the promises that God has for us. God had provided for them, but they couldn't enjoy the miracle because they were thinking about the challenges that they were faced with. And so the second one is judging different generations. After Moses came another leader called Joshua, and Joshua was the one who led the Israelites into the promised land. God was still revealing his plan for them and still at work in them. And great things happened in the time of Joshua. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. And so this is a great verse where it shows that God was at work with the Israelites, and it shows how faithful they were to God. And yet my Bible commentary that I was reading makes a statement that's quite revealing about the situation, and maybe things weren't as great as what first seemed. It says that this statement seems encouraging at first, but upon reflection it is vaguely unsettling, as it allows that Israel's faithful service may be limited. And so let's put it this way. God was working at that time, and he was with them, and they were faithful to God all of the days of Joshua and the elders that served him. But what happens next? What about the next generation? And so we come to the verse that I shared a bit earlier from Judges chapter 2. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, and each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Ganesh. After the whole congregation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Everything that God had been doing and leading up to that point, and the next generation, they didn't know what God had done, and they didn't know the Lord. You see, the book of Judges is full of these judges being raised up. And when there's a judge, the people of Israel, they turn to God. But when the judge dies, they start to go back into their old habits. They start to worship false idols. And so when we think about all of the great things that have happened in our lives, when we think about all the great things that have happened together as a congregation, to think that the next generation, they don't even know the Lord. They don't know the great things that God has done. And so that becomes a warning for us. And so we don't want to become judges. No, we want to raise up other judges. We're called by Jesus to make disciples. And so we have a duty to raise up others that can come along and firstly come to know Jesus, and secondly to equip them so that they can reach others, so that the great things that are going on don't just stop with us. And so sticking with that thought of generations, we need to be called to not judge other generations. We're living in a world and a society right now that is divided. I've read so many articles recently that are blaming different generations for different outbreaks of coronavirus. Young people are to blame. University students, it's their fault. Old people are not taking it seriously enough. All of this finger pointing at different generations, and I don't think it's helpful. When I prepare my talks, I like to go for walks and pray and think about some of the things that I want to talk about. And this time I saw a grandfather and a granddaughter, and they were running around and laughing. And I thought in that moment that when it comes to grandparents and grandchildren, they don't really see generations. What they see is family. And so while the world is looking at different generations and pointing fingers at one another, I think as a church, we are called to see one another as family. And so what does it mean to reach the next generation? What does it mean to reach them if they are our family? And what may prevent us in doing that is if we do start to judge other generations. Why are other generations like that? Why do they make those choices? What is it about that generation that is different to us? Stephen spoke a few weeks back about the essentials and the non-essentials. The essentials are that we want to see the next generation come to know Jesus, and yet the non-essentials are trying to reach that culture and what that culture looks like. And so how do we reach this generation? Well, to the socially distant and the virtually isolated, let us become the community. To the health conscious, let us point towards the one that heals. In a world of instability, let us point to the one who is stable. In a judgmental world, let us show mercy. To a lost generation, Generation C, let it become Generation Christ. Let it become known as a generation that started to turn to Jesus. In everything that has gone on in the world, let us play our part in stepping up to reach this next generation so that we have a generation that knows Jesus. In the book of Judges, there were so many judges that were raised up, and after they died, Israel turned away from the Lord. We're not called to be judges. We're not called just to have great faith. It's brilliant to have your own personal relationship with Jesus. But Jesus calls us to make disciples. And so we have a duty that we're not just here to become judges, but we want to raise up other judges. We want to raise up disciples. We want to raise up a new generation. And so, Lord, we want to know what your plans are in this season, Lord. We want to play our part. We don't want to step aside for the next generation, but we want to step up so that we can support them, Lord. Lord, let us be a community to a socially distant and a virtually isolated generation. Let us point people towards you when they are fearful of what's going on in the world, Lord. And so let us play our part, Lord. Let us step up and let us not see the problems and the trials and the issues that are in front of us, Lord, but let us see your promise that you have on our lives. And so, church, we are called to step up so that we can raise up and equip the next generation. God bless you all, and I'll hopefully speak to you all real soon.
We're gonna be a people of no compromise. We're gonna be the ones who will stand up and fight. So let us call on the name of the one who has brought us to our knees. He's raising up a new generation of truth and hope sold out for his kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come. We're gonna be a people who claim back the land. We're gonna be the vision he's placed in our hands. So let a cry from our hearts rise up for revival in this place. He's raising up a new generation of truth and hope sold out for his kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come. We'll sing aloud for it. We'll never stop before we sing the glory of your kingdom come. We'll sing aloud for it. We'll never stop before we sing the glory of his kingdom come. We'll sing aloud for it. We'll never stop before we sing the glory of his kingdom come. We'll sing aloud for it. We'll never stop before we sing the glory of his kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come. His kingdom come.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for preparing that for us and sharing with us. Hope you've all been blessed and challenged this morning, and I'm just going to close. I just want to read a verse. I'm going to read from Psalm 94, verse 16 to 19. This is in the Message. Who stood up for me against the wicked? Who took my side against evil workers? If God hadn't been there for me, I would never have made it. The minute I said, I'm slipping, I'm falling, your love, God, took hold and held me fast. When I was upset and beside myself, you calmed me down and cheered me up. So that's the God that we follow, the God that we serve, is a God who always wants the best for us, wants to look out for us, and wants to be there for us to provide that comfort and that support. So, Father, for everybody who is needing your comfort, Father, we just pray that they would be able to reach out and to receive that from you. So, guys, thanks for joining us again. I hope you've all been blessed and have a great week. Thank you. Goodbye.
God bless you all.